The girls today in society go for classical poetry, so to win their hearts one must quote with ease Aeschylus and Euripides. But the poet of them all, who will stardom simply raven, is the poet people call the Bard of Stratford-on-Avon. Brush up your Shakespeare, start quoting him now. Brush up your Shakespeare, and the women you will wow.
Just declaim a few lines from Othello.
All right, today's show is about quotations, and that's like the best song I could think of that really gets into the whole idea of, in the beginning, it's not just Shakespeare. So there's so much to say about quotations, and actually a lot that's been said about quotations. The English detective writer Dorothy Sayers said something. She had one of her characters, I think, say, "I always have a quotation for everything. It saves original thinking." Something along those lines. Ralph Waldo Emerson kind of echoed that thought with a long, cranky quote about quotations that ends, "Quotations confess inferiority." No, quotation confesses inferiority. Although probably the best quotation about quotations belongs, unsurprisingly, to the great maker of quotes, Yogi Berra, who said something like, "I didn't really say everything I said." And we're going to get into all of that today, and we're going to get into it with people who know a lot more about quotations than I do. We're going to begin with Elizabeth Knowles, the editor of the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations, and Fred Shapiro, editor of the new Yale Book of Quotations, a brand new edition of which is out right now. He's also associate director for collections and special projects at the Yale Law Library. I have spent the last 2.5 days using every spare moment to go through this book and play with it and have fun, and I have a million questions. But let's begin. First of all, Elizabeth Knowles and Fred Shapiro, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you guys know each other? I mean, is there some kind of conference that quotation experts go to every year where you all meet one another?
That would be a lovely idea. I don't think there's ever been a quotations conference, but in fact, Fred and I know each other over many years, don't we, Fred, through connection with Oxford Dictionaries and the OED.
Right, and you came to New Haven once.
Yes,
with,
and I did, and DSNA as a Dictionary Society of North America as well, I think. So we've, and of course, I know Fred's work very well, and I have just been congratulating him on this very exciting, the new edition.
So, Elizabeth Knowles, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. I want you both to talk a little bit about what makes a quotation a quotation. The new Yale book is very expansive in its view of what could be a quotation, and there are quotations derived from all kinds of venues and genres and all kinds of people. So, Elizabeth Knowles, I don't know, to you, how do we define the category of a quotable quotation?
I think it's quite a slippery concept, but given that any editor of a dictionary of quotations has to start somewhere, my definition would be that a quotation is something which is a unique coinage. It's something said or written by a particular person at a particular time and place in response to particular circumstances. We may not now know who it is, but it was originally the words that somebody coined. They were originally the words coined by somebody, which in another time and place have been reached for by someone else who finds that they express exactly what they want to say. So I think myself that the really lasting quotations are the ones that have the two things. They have an individuality, but they also have a universality. They may be borrowed by somebody else, but they were originally coined by an individual. And that's what I think distinguishes them from, shall we say, proverbial wisdom, which is much more something which emerges as from a common stock, from common wisdom, but is not necessarily expressed in a particular individual way.
So I think all of that seems very, very right. And going through the new Yale book, I found myself thinking that, yes, I mean, quotations work. One of the ways they work is by saying something in better words than we ourselves could come up with. I loved discovering a quote by George Jean Nathan, who's mainly known, I think, as a drama critic, but patriotism is often a veneration of real estate above principles. Wow. That's a terrific quotation. So, Fred Shapiro, talk to me a little bit more about how you see people using such an impressive and comprehensive compendium as the one you've been working on for so long.
Well, people use quotation books often to find quotes on a particular subject. My book is arranged by authors, but I do have a keyword index where someone can look up a word and be guided to quotations that use that word. A lot of my effort on the book went into tracing the origins of quotations, finding as far as possible how far back a given quotation can take. So anyone that's interested in who originated quotations and where and when they use them, I think we'll find a lot of material in my book about that.
Right. And you know, sometimes it's kind of interesting. The dead ends can be as interesting, I think, as the throughways that connect you to the originator. And there's a quote that I use all the time, which I'm sure I don't even say correctly, even given the fact that there may not be a canonical version of it, but it's often ascribed, Fred, to Edmund Burke, and it's, all that is necessary for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing, or something like that. But I note in your book there, and I think I've seen this before, there isn't really a good way to nail that one to Edmund Burke's escutcheon, right?
Right. It's been found to be attributed to Edmund Burke as far back as 1921, but no further than that. So it's very unlikely that it was really originated, I would say it was clearly not originated by Edmund Burke. So what I do in my book is, if the true origin is unfindable, I present what is the earliest that is findable, and what was the earliest wording of it. I do this in little annotations that are scattered throughout the book, and to me these are the most interesting parts of it, the book.
Elizabeth, sometimes the quotations that we quote unquote know, are a little out of whack, or maybe just in the wrong language. And I think most people grow up hearing that Julius Caesar's last words were et tu, Brute, or et tu, Brutus, or something. I think we know that he would have spoken, and I think we know via a source too, that as many kind of higher class Romans of the time did, he spoke Greek, and he probably would have said something like kai su teknon, which is basically the same idea, right? You too, kid.
Yes, but I think also that it's very interesting with quotations. Yes, I mean accuracy. We must all want scholarship and accuracy, but it is very interesting sometimes to look at what people believe about quotations,
Yep.
And there are times when this really does inform the context. One of the things that interests me most about quotations, Fred, who is an exemplary researcher, was talking very rightly about the interest of taking something back to the original. I'm also very interested in the journey, because it seems to me that once quotations begin to be used as quotations, they can be as subject to language change as any other lexical element. And there are questions that one wants to ask. Now, the Edmund Burke non-quotation, if you like, and I think everybody's agreed it's not Burke. But what I find fascinating and at the moment inexplicable is why does it surface in 1920, and why from about 1950 it then becomes a very well-known political coinage. It's used a great deal. The usage level goes right up. And you think, well, why didn't it surface before? Why is there not a 19th century? This is not to say that it's Burke, but I would like to know more about the journey of something which has become, I would say, one of the best known quotations, albeit a non-quotation, that we've got.
Right, and sometimes, Elizabeth, it's there's a way in which popular culture can warp the woof of that very fabric. One of the ones that I know that you like to talk about sometimes is the things said by Edward R. Murrow about Winston Churchill. He mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. The problem being that increasingly people will probably think it was said by someone else because of a movie, correct?
I think they might, because I mean it's a wonderful phrase actually, and it was used by Edward R. Murrow after the war about Churchill. But in the 2018 film The Darkest Hour, at a very dramatic point when Churchill has made a speech in the House of Commons, it's a very well-known speech, and an absolutely genuine speech. He wins over a previously hostile house, and his political rival, Halifax, who is sitting in the gallery watching, has a friend with him, and the friend says, what's he done? Feeling the change of mood. And Halifax says he's mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. Now, dramatically, that works 100%. I can exactly see why they used it. But I do wonder whether in future, that might then become to be attributed to Halifax.
Fred, do you ever, as you're discovering these quotations and researching these quotations, I found even just going through the book, occasionally I would hit one where just hairs would rise up on the back of my neck, maybe not literally, but metaphorically. Quotations which are so incredibly apt or just say so much about the person. Oddly enough, back to baseball for a second, there was a Jim Bouton quote, which I guess I'm going to have to do off the top of my head, but it was something to the effect of, I spent my whole life thinking about how I should be gripping a baseball, and in retrospect, it turns out it was the other way around, something like that. I butchered it. But the whole idea of Bouton sort of realizing the baseball had gripped him. Have you had that experience where you just find a quote and you go, wow, that is poetry?
Yes. I mean, one quote that I like, which is attributed to John Maynard Keynes, although that's not a correct attribution, but the quote goes, "When my information changes, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?" And that to me, that's the perfect thing to say if anyone criticizes you for changing your mind. And it epitomizes in a very pithy way a brilliant comeback line.
Fred, one of the things that you have tackled here is hip hop. There are citations to lots and lots of preeminent hip hop artists. Is that something that you did? I'm assuming, like the first edition, I think was 2006, or at least copyrighted 2006. Is this a new effort to document just some of the things that are said in the world of rap and hip hop?
Well, I did work very hard to try to encompass some of contemporary popular culture. I have to say it's not easy to find, I think, very eloquent lines in our culture nowadays. And I personally am not that familiar at all with hip hop music. My son is very interested in it, and I, for years, tried to get him to tell me what are the most famous lines from hip hop, but I ended up having to do a lot of research myself. I did try to include things like that, although it's still a very small portion of the book. Also,
because of hip hop has sort of fluid authorship and a lot of collaboration and borrowing and trading back and appropriation. So, I mean, there's Who had 99 problems, Ice-T or Jay-Z? That question will be debated for centuries, I'm sure. And Elizabeth, that swings back to a much larger problem, which is in terms of what you and Fred do and what you do in further revisions and additions. How do you try to keep it from, or maybe you don't, presumably you want to try to keep this from being dominated by white males, although so much of what was canonical for so many centuries was dominated by white males. So how do you think about correctives for that?
It's a balance, I think. You can't start by saying this is what people ought to be quoting, but what you can try to be is more and more sensitive as to where you may look for evidence. I mean, Fred mentioned talking to his son, who's very keen on hip hop. I mean, it's making sure perhaps that you don't fall into that. You don't fall into the trap of becoming blind to something that is very much quoted, but you don't happen to be looking at the places it's being quoted. So I think that's one of the ways. I think today that although the digital and electronic world brings its challenges, it does also give us the means whereby we can do much more sampling and taking the sort of testing whether things are being quoted, what is being quoted. But you're right that I think it's something that you always need to remain alert to, that you haven't simply failed to see something because you haven't realized it's a thing to see.
To that point, Elizabeth, one of the questions I think that does, puzzle us and must be a challenge for you is, why do certain quotations endure, survive, prevail, rise to the top like cream, and other quotations are perhaps forgotten? Any thoughts about sort of what makes or breaks them?
It can be, I think, that something maybe a quotation may be associated with a particular person. One of the things I was looking at a couple of years ago was a slight alteration. We must guard even our enemies against injustice, attributed to Tom Paine, the 18th century radical. The original quotation, which it almost certainly reflects, is, "He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy against oppression." But the shorter form, and I think one of the things about quotations is that we very often edit as we remember. So it's quite likely that quotations do get slightly trimmed as they're repeated. But in this particular case, it was a great favourite of Graham Greene's. He used it in quite high-profile circumstances when he came to New York in 1950, talking about political circumstances and the McCarthy era. He used it again in 1981 when he was receiving a literary award for his novel The End of the Affair. And if you've got somebody using somebody very well known using a particular form and possibly repeating it over decades, that may be one of the things that actually will lodge it in the public consciousness.
All right, we're going to take a little break here, a very short break. We will be back with more about quotations with our guests, Elizabeth Knowles and Fred Shapiro.
Quotation profound, and I'm here to break it down. You see, the dictionary wrote that to quote is to devote your word to someone else's statement while you quote a quotation. You can also quote a quote in the punctuation nation. Quote me! Quotation marks come in pairs. If they're at the start, at the end, they'll be there.
We're back. The subject today is quotations. Of course, to whatever extent your head is full of quotations, a lot of those quotations probably come from movies. And if you're a stickler for exactitude, you should realize that a lot of your memories of what was said in movies is wrong, just misremembered or passed along in the wrong way, or sometimes because an impressionist does a version of a particular actor that involves saying a certain phrase differently than the way it was really said in the movie. So anyway, just as an example, remember in Casablanca, remember how Ingrid Bergman says, "Play it again, Sam." The only problem with that is she doesn't.
Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by.
Oh, I can't remember it myself. I'm a little rusty on it.
Okay, well, how about the evil queen in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? I mean, everybody knows that she says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" Or does she?
What wouldst thou know, my queen?
Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?
Famed is thy beauty, majesty.
In fact, that misquote is so famous that there's another Snow White movie called Mirror, Mirror. Okay, this one is so persistent that it's even on some of the packaging of further reissues of the movie. The movie is Wall Street. Everybody knows. Gordon Gekko says, "Greed is good," right? Here he goes saying, "Greed is good."
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
Okay, well, maybe not so much. But that is printed right on the DVD packaging cover of the movie Wall Street. So somebody thought that he said it that way. And then there's Apocalypse Now with Robert Duvall saying, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory." Except really...
I love the smell of napalm in the morning. You know, one time we had a hail bomb for 12 hours. When it was all over, I walked up. We didn't find one of them, not one stinking dink body. The smell, you know, that gasoline smell. The whole hill. It smelled like victory.
And maybe the most famous one of them all, "Luke, I am your father." He sort of says that, although here's what he really says.
He told me you killed him. No, I am your father.
So maybe we're splitting hairs about that, though. Close enough. Or maybe not close enough. So to talk a little bit more about attributions, misquotes, things like that, Fred Shapiro, editor of the new Yale Book of Quotations, brand new edition out. Fascinating, a lot of fun. I'm addicted to this book. He's also associate director for collections and special projects at the Yale Law Library. So one of the things you really did try to do is focus somewhat on misquotations or misattributions. There seems to be maybe a little bit of a pattern where quotes that are really from women wind up being attributed to men. Tell us about the Serenity Prayer.
All right. Elizabeth Knowles talked about the journey of a quotation. And I think she's very right about that. And to me, the most fascinating journey I've found of any quotation is the Serenity Prayer. I, together with Professor William Fitzgerald from Rutgers University, have for 10, 20 years been studying the Serenity Prayer. And it's usually attributed to the great theologian and political philosopher Reinhold Niebuhr. And Niebuhr's daughter wrote an entire book called The Serenity Prayer, revolving around a story of how her father sat down in a bucolic village in the Berkshires in Massachusetts and wrote the Serenity Prayer in 1943. And I searched the words from the Serenity Prayer in newspaper databases. They're tremendously powerful databases now of historical newspapers. And I found that there were 7 instances where the Serenity Prayer appeared in print before 1943, back to 1936. And the New York Times wrote a front page story about that discovery. I kept I kept researching it, and for a while I felt that it was Niebuhr, that Niebuhr may have used it before 1943, and it just didn't get publicized until later, and his daughter just didn't know about the earlier usage. But by doing database searches, I finally found that it was used in 1933 by an obscure woman, a YWCA official named Winifred Weigel. And all the evidence, when you look at, Professor Fitzgerald and I have now found hundreds of early instances of the Serenity Prayer, and it's clear when you look at the whole picture that Winifred Weigel did originate it. But it's a pattern, as you say, that unsung women create great quotations, and sometimes, often, they get attributed to famous men instead of the true originator.
Right. In fact, another one that I find fascinating is something that really kind of fell into vogue, I don't know, maybe about 10, 15 years ago. Sing like no one is listening, love like you've never been hurt, dance like nobody's watching, live like it's heaven on earth. It's been attributed to Mark Twain. We're going to deal in our final segment today exclusively with the way in which Twain is credited with so many things that he didn't actually say. But that actually comes from, as you've discovered and documented, a songwriter named Susanna Clark. So sorry, Satchel Paige and Mark Twain. Anyway, we have to stop there. We're going to take a little break. We've been talking to Fred Shapiro. He is the editor of the new Yale Book of Quotations, just out, Associate Director for Collections and Special Projects at the Yale Law Library. And now, I wish I had a good quote for it, but people are going to ask you to pledge and support this radio station, and especially this show. If you donate while we're on the air, we get a little more credit for it, so think about that.
As time goes by,
Hi there, you're listening to Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Ali Oshinsky, a reporter here. I'm here with my coworker, Meg Fitzgerald. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Ali. Good to be here.
I want to interview you right now because this fund drive, we have partnered with Connecticut Food Share, and there's a gift of $10 a month where you can give Food Share. It will help to support Food Share. So we'll donate 25 meals to Connecticut Food Share, and then you'll also be supporting Connecticut Public. But the question I have for you, Meg, is I believe you went to Food Share. Could you give us like a little flavor of what no pun intended, of what Food Share does in Connecticut?
Absolutely. So Food Share, and if you've been following some of our coverage throughout the pandemic, Food Share has done a huge operation out of Rensselaer Field, as well as some of their other satellite locations where they've done food donations for people in need, helping people across the state to fight food insecurity. So actually a pile of us employees here at Connecticut Public volunteered to do some shifts to help prep and bag food that was handed out at these locations. So Connecticut Public has done this great partnership for this pledge drive with Food Share. So as Ali said, for only $10 a month, not only will you be helping Food Share by those $10 gets 25 meals for those in need. We also have an option where if you want to do $24 a month, which would be amazing, you'd also be giving 60 meals for those in need. So
That's great.
Yeah, so you're not just your money is doing sort of double effort. Not only are you helping people across the state fight food insecurity, you're helping to support us at Connecticut Public to continue to bring you some of the great programming like the Colin McEnroe Show that you're listening to this afternoon with us.
Yeah, so if you want to do that, you can go to ctpublic.org. And then actually you can check out our fancy new website, which is pretty fun. Click the red donate button. It also has a little heart on it because you love Connecticut Public. And then go, I don't want to tell you what you feel, but I'm guessing if you're donating, you love it or like it in some way. And then click on whatever amount works for you per month. As Meg said before, for $10 a month, you can give 25 meals. And also give $10 to Connecticut Public. For $16, 40 meals. For $24, 60 meals. I mean, it's a deal. And it's a great way to support two of your favorite Connecticut institutions. So 1-800-584-2788 or ctpublic.org.
Yes, and if you're a fan of the Colin McEnroe Show, you know that Colin and I almost said the Where We Live team. Gosh,
the Colin
so
McEnroe,
much great programming here.
They all help each other. Yeah,
there's so much great programming here. It's hard to keep it all straight. But if you love the Colin McEnroe Show as much as we do, you know that there is so much great topics and perspectives that Colin and his team cover in the show. Allie, do you have sort of a favorite show or something that you've heard on Colin's show recently that you just can get off your brain?
Well, as a longtime listener, I gotta say I know that this can be, some people don't get it and others do, but I do kind of love the ongoing sort of jokes and references. The more you listen to Colin, the more you sort of understand his sense of humor. And so, I think back to his Not About to Peers show where they tried to do this sort of conceptual show that was not about something. They tried to make it not about anything at all. Of course, it ended up being about something, which was that it was not about anything. But, it's sort of that fun, quirky stuff. I also love really fun conceptual shows. I think one of my favorite things about Colin is just listening. One of my favorite activities, my Colin McEnroe activities, listening to the show and just listening to a great brain at work. So if you like listening to that brain, if you like listening to all the brains on Connecticut Public Radio, you can donate to ctpublic.org. Well, you can't donate. You can go there on your computer, click donate, give your money, feel good. Or you can call 1-800-584-2788. That's 1-800-584-2788. Donate what you can. Show your love, and thank you so much for listening to Connecticut Public Radio.
All right. I also should have pithy quotes for this little part of the show when I thank the key people on the show. That includes Kat Pastor, who is the technical producer of this and all episodes of the Colin McEnroe Show. And Lily Tyson is the producer of this particular episode of the show, where we've been talking about quotations. We've been as general as we possibly could be. But there's certain people who are just quote machines. They are just, no matter what you do, you can't limit them. In a book like the new Yale Book of Quotations, you can't limit Oscar Wilde to a couple of pages. I mean, there's just too much, and H.L. Mencken and people like that, their reputations are well earned as quote factories. But maybe nobody is as big a quote factory, particularly when you fold in all the things that he didn't say that people just assume he must have said, than Mark Twain. And since I'm sitting, I don't know, it's like a 5-minute walk from here to the Mark Twain house, an even shorter walk to Joseph Twitchell's church. And since I worked for many years for the Hartford Courant, where Charles Dudley Warner was, I believe, an editor, he also, some of his quotes get attributed to Twain. We're going to spend this final segment just talking about the Quotable Mark Twain, which also happens to be the title of a book by Kent Rasmussen. He is the editor of the Quotable Mark Twain and Mark Twain A to Z, among other books. And he's joining us now to talk about Twain and quotations. Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing there?
Good. So,
incidentally, you mentioned that you're close to the Mark Twain house. I don't know if you're aware that Katharine Hepburn's family lived in Hartford. And around 1920, the Mark Twain house was a school, and Katharine Hepburn's brother attended the school in that house.
Well, I also know that it was a private home, I believe, owned by the family of Richard Bissell. Now, there's two Richard Bissells. I think this is the one, the Bay of Pigs Richard Bissell. But yeah, that's a whole other show. We can't get too bogged down in that, Kent, or we'll never get to what we need to get to. So Twain is so quotable and is the speaker of so many epigrams and maxims that he's even got a good quote about maxims, right? And I think this is one of your favorite ones about the proper proportions of a maxim. Tell us about that.
Well, I don't have it right before me. What's that worded? The proper proportions of a maximum or maximum of sense to a minimum of sound?
Yeah, you have it basically right.
And
Go ahead.
Yeah, what that states, obviously, is that the conciseness is the important thing. He was very good at expressing thoughts in a few words. He was very interested in maxims. He actually went out of his way to write maxims in some of his books, most notably Pudd'nhead Wilson. Each chapter begins with a pithy maxim.
And Pudd'nhead Wilson actually, I believe, also includes Pudd'nhead Wilson's new calendar in More Tramps Abroad includes that quote about maxims themselves. Well, tell me one or two of your actual favorite Twain quotes, and then we can talk about debunking some of the things attributed to him. What are the ones that you love?
Well, aren't many. I get stumped when I get an open-ended question like that. I sent you some samples.
Sure.
One of them, which I chose because it's kind of unusual. And darn it, I can't find the text right here.
Give me a hint.
Off the wall thing.
Yeah, give me a hint because I probably got it.
Well, here it is. He's talking about elevators in France.
Mm-hmm.
He mentions that the elevators he calls them lifts, in Paris, had held two persons and traveled at such a slow gait that a spectator could not tell which way it was going. I first read that about 30 years ago, and it stuck in my mind all these years. The idea of being in an elevator that is so slow you can't tell whether you're going up or down. And I cite that as an example. It's not brilliantly worded by any means, but it's an example of Mark Twain's ability to see something that not everybody else sees. He had a real knack for writing things in a way that are memorable. And as I said, I read that 30 years ago, and it's never left my mind. I often think of it when I'm in a situation where things are moving so slowly. Another maxim that I like, and it's fairly well known, is he's talking about, this was a private note he wrote in his own journals. My books are water. Those of the great geniuses are wine. Everybody drinks water. Well, obviously what he's saying there is that he doesn't compare himself to the great writers in profundity, but he writes for the common person. And the common people read his books. They may not read the books of the brilliant writers, but they read his books. And I think that's very true. And as a matter of fact, I tend to think of myself similarly. I don't compare myself to Mark Twain, but the kinds of books that I've written on Mark Twain, I wouldn't regard as brilliant in the same sense as a lot of the great scholarly works. But my books are books that do get read. And I feel a certain pride in thinking of myself that way. My books are water.
Yeah, and I'm not sure Twain 100. Yep. I'm not sure that Twain 100% believed that about himself. It's a nice self-deprecating thing to say, but I'm pretty sure he knew that Huckleberry Finn was wine and not water. There is a way. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say I don't think he appreciated the significance of Huckleberry Finn. He liked that book, but he didn't regard it as one of his greatest works.
Mm-hmm.
He said on more than one occasion that he thought his best work was his book on Joan of Arc, Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc. And there's probably not a single person on earth that would agree with him on that. Do you have a favorite quote yourself?
Not maybe a favorite quote, but first of all, as somebody who lives in New England, I've always liked, if you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a few minutes. And I think, one of the more...
He didn't say that.
Well, really? Because the Yale book, I know that he didn't say everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. But I thought he did say the New England one. But yeah, go ahead. Instruct me.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a pass on that one. Those two quotes are obviously related.
Yeah. I think Charles Dudley Warner said a version of the everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Twain definitely did not say that one. One that's kind of tricky, but I think is certainly the new Yale book attributes it to him, is history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. What's your take on that? Are you fairly confident that that's from him?
I'll tell you the truth, I'm not sure. Does the source you have there cite where that comes from?
I would take too long to look it up, actually. But it's an interesting one, too, because I've seen it attributed to other people, and even the site Quote Investigator. I think one time I was trying to figure out who actually said it, and there seemed to be a little bit less certainty. I mean, there's something about Twain, I think, because of the way that he says things, that if you encounter something else that seems kind of playful, seems kind of interestingly worded, and is pithy in the way that he talks about, having a maximum amount of sense and a minimum amount of verbiage, people just sort of assume that it probably is him. I mean, another one of his that I love is the difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. It's the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. But yeah, I mean, we run into other stuff, and it sort of seems before the break that led into this thing, I talked about the quote about dance like nobody's watching, which has been attributed to both him and to Satchel Paige. It's not by either one of them. So, I mean, it seems like somebody who's an expert on the quotable Mark Twain. I've been told that the social media managers at the Mark Twain House, a big part of their job will be just going on Twitter and saying, nope, he didn't say that. Nope, he didn't say that. I mean, I assume that's sort of part of your quote unquote job too. There's just sort of saying, nope, he didn't say that.
I don't get that much of that personally. There are two other venues that do. One, of course, is the Mark Twain Project in Berkeley. The Mark Twain papers are housed at the University of California there, and they're getting phone calls and correspondence all the time. The one quote that is possibly the most famous misquote of Mark Twain, and it's a quote that's very important in my own life, is the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer in San Francisco. You must have heard that one.
Mm-hmm.
That was important to me for a couple of reasons. One, I grew up in Berkeley, across the bay from San Francisco, so I had a fairly intimate acquaintance with San Francisco, and I was quite taken by that quote. But the people at the Mark Twain papers there had been asked about that quote so many times, they finally did an investigation and printed a broadside so that when they got queries, they just hand out the paper. And they concluded there's no evidence whatever that Mark Twain ever said that. And they found some evidence of another writer who had said something similar. But as I said, that quote's important to me. I was in Aberdeen, Scotland in 1977, walking down Main Street, or what do they call it, the High Street in Aberdeen, on a sunny day in September. Now, this is September on a sunny day, and there was a cold wind whipping down from the North Sea. And at the time, I felt so chilled, I thought to myself, the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer in Aberdeen. It's a wonderful quote, but it's absolutely has nothing to do with Mark Twain. His only remarks about San Francisco weather contradicted. I did a little check on that and found that the all-time record low temperature in San Francisco during the summer months is in the mid-40s. So he actually criticized San Francisco for having weather that is so mild that it was boring.
Right.
Nevertheless, he's still quoted on that.
Oh yeah, no. I until you told me that, I absolutely would have hewed to the idea that he's the person who said that. Actually, having also been, I actually do feel with San Francisco, having kayaked on a beautiful day in shorts and short sleeves out of Sausalito in mid-December. It does sometimes seem like the seasons are a little bit inverted there somehow. We should talk about one of the ways that you became attracted to Mark Twain and his quotes is learning that quote wasn't true, but also his line about the Book of Mormon, which is true. Tell us about that one.
When you say that the line about the Book of Mormon is true, do you mean that what he said was true, or true that he said it?
It's true that he said it. I'm not pronouncing on the Book of Mormon one way or another, at least not today.
Oh, I'm just teasing you here. I think I first heard that remark when I was in a history seminar. I was in grad school at UCLA during the late 60s. And a fellow student, for some reason, I have no idea why, mentioned that Mark Twain described the Book of Mormon as chloroform in print. And I loved that remark and thought about it for years and years. And later, in the late, or actually it was about 1990, I was working at UCLA as an editor on a document project. And one day I decided to find out, where did Mark Twain make the remark about the Book of Mormon and also the remark about San Francisco? So I went up to the main library on campus and looked over the Mark Twain books and selected Roughing It, which I had never read, although I grew up with a set of Mark Twain books and had read a lot of them. And when I read that book, I was surprised that I didn't find the San Francisco quote. And as I said, everything I found about San Francisco seemed to contradict that sentiment about the weather. But it does contain the Book of Mormon remark. The graduate student that made that remark in the seminar later became a dean at the University of Wisconsin, and I had the great pleasure of sending him a copy of my book, The Quotable Mark Twain, in which I acknowledged his contribution to the book. So,
all right. Well, Ken Rasmussen, we're gonna have to stop here because the show's over. To quote, yeah, I'm sorry, editor of The Quotable Mark Twain and Mark Twain A to Z, among other books. Groucho Marx, it turns out, may not have said, "I've had a wonderful time, but this wasn't it." I hope you've had a wonderful time. I hope this was it. People are going to ask you to support shows like this one. Please help out.
Good afternoon. I'm Meg Fitzgerald. I'm the Senior Project Manager here at Connecticut Public, and I'm here along with my colleague and reporter, Ali Oshinsky. Hi, Ali.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, listeners. Hi, Meg, too.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, listeners, thank you for joining us and for being fans of the Colin McEnroe Show and Connecticut Public Radio. As you know, we're in the middle of our Pledge Week this week. And as we're maybe coming up along towards the end of the week, I know one of the things I most look forward to is The Nose, which is the Colin McEnroe Show's mostly weekly roundup of basically, it's like a public radio take on the nonsense celebrity news that you mostly don't expect public radio to have a take on. And I love that.
And we have a take.
So yes.
Hot takes, cold takes, lukewarm takes.
I mean, yes. If you are not sure what you want to binge, watch, listen to, or read, just dive into any The Nose show and you can get caught up in any pop culture thing you feel like you've missed out on. Or if you just want to geek out on all your favorite guilty pleasures, maybe you're doing that out in public, maybe you're doing it in secret. But The Nose with Colin and team and, some really great voices from around the state are a great way to sort of just dive into all those juicy things. And if that's something that you love about the Colin McEnroe Show, then I would encourage you to support us because we can't do this programming without your help. And you can do that by going to ctpublic.org and clicking on the donate button, or you can give us a call by calling 1-800-584-2788.
You know what I love about The Nose, Meg? I feel somewhat freed from guilty pleasures because the guilt of guilty pleasures by The Nose, or rather just that pop culture is important. It does shape our world, and it's specifically held in sort of the young female realm. But here we have Colin saying we're going to pay attention to this because the people who create pop culture are important to our society and our culture.
That's right.
And so you tune into Connecticut Public Radio, one may assume, to be I know the serious news. But guess what? We're also going to give you some fun, goofy, and we're not going to call it guilty. It is relevant.
Yes.
We're going to give that through the Colin McEnroe Show.
Listen,
so if
you want to... sorry. I was going to say, you know what? When we get back to the office and you want some water cooler talk, you better be listening to the Friday Nose so that you're prepared.
If you want to support the Colin McEnroe Show, call 1-800-584-2788 or go to ctpublic.org. Thank you.